Okay. Okay, I see people starting to come in. I'm just going to give everybody about a minute or so to join, and then we will get started.
Sure. Just going to mute myself for now. And
Perfect. Okay. It is 11 o'clock, so we'll get started. So hello everyone, and welcome to the Invasive Species Center's webinar series. My name is Leona Hranowitz, and I am the Program Development Intern at the Invasive Species Center, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the Invasive Species Center honors the long history of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nations people, and the land known as Canada, and strives to show respect to their ancestors, their communities, and to them individually. We greatly appreciate the significance of the lands, water, and all living things, and offer our gratitude to the Indigenous people for their care for, and teachings about our Earth. Our relationships with the Indigenous communities are important, and we will continue to listen and learn how we can be in a good relationship with Indigenous peoples, the lands and waters, and all living things, and act accordingly. The Invasive Species Center respectfully acknowledges that our head office is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Batchewana and Garden River First Nations, as well as the longtime settlement of the Métis people in the Robertson-Huron Treaty area. The Invasive Species Center is a non-for-profit organization that connects stakeholders, knowledge, and technology to prevent the spread and introduction of invasive species that harm Canada's environment, economy, and society. We've got lots of great invasive species resources on our website, including species profiles, best management practices, and more. So check us out at www.invasivespeciescenter.ca. You can also sign up on our homepage for our newsletter, biweekly media scan, and event invitations, which is where you can hear about upcoming webinars such as this one. The ISC has launched a new invasive species training program that offers virtual courses on topics related to invasive species. We currently have 2 courses available which focus on different forest invasives, but we'll be releasing new content regularly, so stay tuned for that. Make sure to check out our website and sign up to receive updates on when these new courses will become available. Before we get started, there are a few things I'd like to mention. There will be time for questions at the end of the webinar. So if you have a question at any time, please type it in the question box and I will read it to our presenter after the webinar. If you are having technical difficulties at any time, please type them into the chat box or respond to the email found in your registration and we will try to resolve it quickly for you. We've also enabled closed captioning, so if you would like to follow along that way, you can turn it on with the closed caption button on your taskbar. Lastly, there will be a brief survey following the webinar. If you could take some time to fill it out, we would greatly appreciate it. Today's webinar is titled Coming in Hot, Early Detection and Rapid Response Priorities in Southeast Michigan, and I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Shikha Singh. Shikha is the coordinator for the Jackson-Lenawee-Washtenaw Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. She performs invasive species survey and management activities and provides education and outreach opportunities within the Tri-County region. Originally from London, Ontario, she completed her bachelor's degree at the University of Western Ontario and came to Michigan State University to complete her graduate work in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife. Her master's research focused on water and sediment quality in the lower Grand River and Lake Michigan beaches, and her PhD research centered on the water policy and conservation efforts of local and county governments. In addition to her work as an invasive species coordinator, she seeks to increase access to environmental education for underserved through youth programming and seminars. Some of her hobbies include playing soccer, outdoor photography, and cooking international foods. And with that, I'd like to thank Shikha for joining us, and I'm going to pass it over to you to get started.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here. So thank you for allowing me to do this. And I will just put this. All right. So thanks for that wonderful introduction. And like I said, I'm really excited to be here. And the talk I'll be giving, coming in hot. So these are species that We are currently, prioritizing and spending a lot of our time and resources on. And as I kind of go through the presentation, I want to set the base because I'm sure there's a variety of people attending. So some of you may be professionals, some of you may be new to the field of invasion biology. So just to kind of set the stage, one of my favorite biologists, if we can have that, is Dr. E.O. Wilson. And he talked about, on a global basis, the two great destroyers of biodiversity are habitat destruction and invasion by exotic species. So what exactly is an invasive species? An invasive species is one that is not native, so it's not from around here, and whose introduction causes some type of harm, whether it's harm to the environment, human health, or the economy. So let's just get those basic definitions out of the way. And I want to introduce exactly what a CISMA is, so a Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. We are a group of partners and stakeholders that have come together and have identified that invasive species are an important topic to address in our area. And we work together. We are grant funded. So currently I am funded through the Michigan Invasive Species Grant Program and the GLRI federal grant. And we do outreach, survey management. Sometimes we'll be asked to consult on an issue, provide feedback. And we also do a lot of site visits and, help identify what people are, thinking might be invasive species or native species. And we work both on natives and invasives as well. And so the goal of this talk is to highlight some of the species that we're interested in, why we're concerned about those species. And it's basically to maybe give a heads up to some of the agencies and homeowners and residents who may not have these species, who may not have heard of some of these species, but potentially it's coming your way within the next couple of years. So the more information you have before it becomes a problem, the better it is. And so we're just trying to increase local capacity through this talk. And then we also have a couple of geographical vectors to talk about some of the things that we're doing from an education and outreach perspective, and also to promote the idea of CISMAs and other weed management areas, which is, sometimes similar to the CISMAs, as local resources. So to kind of introduce our region, so Jackson, Lenawee, Washtenaw, we are in the southeast part of Michigan, and Lenawee does border the Michigan-Ohio border. And we have a really diverse landscape with a lot of aquatic features, a lot of fens and, forests and stuff. We have a lot of unique natural areas. So if you visit our area, look out for Waterloo Recreation Area, Pinckney, great camping sites. A lot of people will, drive up for the day and, kayak and visit Watkins Lake State Park and County Preserve. That's a unique area that it's one part is managed by the state, one part is managed by a county Parks and Rec group. And it's a designated waterfowl refuge. So we get a lot of really cool species in that area, songbirds, waterfowl, you name it. And in addition to, a lot of the fun species that you may see commonly, like deer, various songbirds, squirrels, we do have some unique species. And in one of the corners, you'll see the Mitchell Stater butterfly. It's very, very rare. And I just got this picture this year, and it's like maybe 9 sites or something like that, or 15 sites in the Great Lakes region of where this butterfly actually exists. And so we also have, various freshwater mussels. We have a really cool phenotype of the Massasauga rattlesnake. So usually you think Massasauga rattlesnakes, there's like the dark brown saddle patch snake, but we actually have a melanistic version, and it's like all black. You can kind of see the saddle part markings underneath the skin. Really pretty. And then the Blandings turtles, which is not on the endangered species list, but is definitely a species of concern. So we have a lot of cool species worth protecting in this area. And you can't talk about Michigan without acknowledging the importance of agriculture. Apples, we rank 3rd in the nation. Grapes were 8. Christmas tree, this is kind of surprising, but we are ranked 3rd in the nation on that aspect. We have a lot of hops and maple syrup. And Michigan food and agriculture contributes more than $104 billion to our state's economy. We have over 4,000 farms. The forestry sector employs about 41,000 people, and it is a major economic output, so about $12 billion. And so, as you can imagine, agriculture and forestry, they are heavily impacted by a variety of invasive species. And so that's why, we're really thankful for the Michigan Invasive Species Grant Program, that it allows us to survey and assist other agencies in managing and doing education and outreach to kind of prevent or slow down some of these species from coming here. So it's definitely a very relevant talk to the state of Michigan, and I suspect in a variety of other natural resource and agriculture-based economies as well. So we'll get started with some of the species that we are working on. And I do apologize for some of you. I mean, some of you may be like complete experts in some of these species, and it may be like, a repeat, but bear with me. Hopefully there'll be some new information, at other species and so on. So the first one I would like to highlight is European frogbit. And I would also like to acknowledge some of our partners, Eagle. That's the Water Environment Group. That's a state agency. And I would like to specifically thank Tom and Bill for working with me on this and allowing me to tag in on some of their previous work. So European frogbit, it is a free floating and can potentially root in shallow water. So it's a really pretty plant. Its leaves are pretty leathery. It looks like a heart shape, but I say it looks like a little kidney bean, but heart, kidney bean shaped, 1/2 inch to 2.5 inch leaves with 3 white petals and a yellow center. And if you look at this petal, this is me scooping one plant out, and you can kind of see how crazy, it sends runners and shoots out. So it can create a very tangled mess quickly. Frogbit does have a turion. A turion is a seed-like bud or small shoots that can detach and form new plants. So they'll typically fall and sink to the bottom. And, if you have mud that you're moving back and forth at the bottom of your boat, or, maybe sometimes your lines or your boots can get it, you could be transporting some of these turions. So here's a really good close-up picture of a turion where it's, some plants are starting to emerge, some buds. So this is one species that, we're definitely concerned about transporting sediment from one spot to another. And so there are a few characteristics for this species. It prefers slow moving water. So you'll find it in, some ponds, some wetlands, and, some drainage ditches and stuff. So it prefers slow moving waters. We did see it in the Grand River, some of those bends. So it can be found in the river, and it is found in the Portage River down here as well. But generally, slow moving waters, we don't know for sure how it's being spread from site to site, but some of the usual suspects include, boats and kayaks. It is an aquarium plant, so you're not allowed to buy the European frogbit in the pet stores. There is an Amazonian version. So there is Amazonian frogbit, which you are allowed to purchase. It looks similar. The leaves are a little bit more striated. So it does look a little bit different. But again, it is an aquarium. So people have also dumped their aquarium when they don't want them. We also think waterfowl and waterfowl hunting activities could also move this around, because we're finding it in dense cattails and phragmites. And some of the impacts for this species or by this species include restricting the flow of water and sometimes choking out, other kind of plants. It can also prevent boat traffic. And when it forms a mat on top of the water, it can block, sunlight from coming in. And once it dies, it sinks to the bottom and then, you know, releases all that carbon. So it definitely is something that can impact people's recreational opportunities and change the habitat. And we are making progress on this species. It is a little bit tricky, and I'll show a couple of pictures as to why. And what we've used this year to treat it is flumioxin. And we have seen some improvement, like I said. But as you can see, oh, here's a couple of site views. So here's like a little bit more of Waterloo Rec area. So all these yellow red dots, they show where frogbit is. So you can kind of see that it is in quite a few different areas. And there's a couple of sites outside of this region that have it as well. And so here's a picture of Winnewana impoundment. So if you're looking for these species, you're going to want to focus and look at areas right along the bank. So here's a picture. You're kayaking by, and if you look carefully, you can kind of see one plant, you know, nestled inside. You know, and we have a lot of, you know, really cool water snakes around too. So it can be easy to miss. And then at Green Lake, you know, we have a small boat launch there. It's near a rustic campground. And we're finding that, you know, the frogbit is not necessarily making a complete coverage around the shoreline. There's some patchy spots, and then there's nothing for a big stretch. And then there's another spot where there's a bunch of frogbit. And if you look in this picture over here, you can kind of see, it's hard to see, it's kind of in the mud. So we actually got out of our kayaks and started tromping around and saw some frogbit there. And here's like a small one. And this is, you know, sometimes you're out surveying and, you know, you don't really see it, but then all of a sudden you'll see some tiny little plant. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack in some sense. But you can also see in this picture up here, like how, you know, it's spreading, and there's like a lot of it. And Mill Lake, you know, we are seeing some spots. Mud Lake was actually kind of interesting. Since I've been surveying for this, I've only seen, this is the only instance where I saw one frogbit plant, you know, kind of away from the shoreline. So you can kind of see, I'm in the kayak over here, and I pulled out, and I don't know how I saw this because we're kind of crossing to another site, but in front of me, I saw this plant, and I'm like, that looks suspicious. So I don't know if that was just a random plant that got, you know, blown in there or something, but anyway, there's a couple other pictures on the bottom. And we actually have a really cool partnership with NRCS, and we are co-located with them. That's a federal partner that we're with, and they do a lot of site visits, and they work with landowners, you know, modifying people's properties or working with them to kind of make properties more environmentally friendly. And, you know, as often, I always talk about, you know, invasive species with my colleagues. And one day, they sent me some pictures. I was like, I think this is frogbit. And so we went and checked it out, and we found a really dense infestation in a drainage ditch. And you can kind of see really mucky in this middle picture here. It's all mud. And then this is the drainage ditch over here. When we went at the end of summer, it wasn't moving at all. It was still moist, but not a lot of water flow. And this ditch eventually drains into the Portage River, which we know has a healthy population of frogbit. And we also found frogbit in 2 small man-made ponds at another part of his property. And I think he's has some duck decoys in there. So I think they're trying to also encourage waterfowl in it as well. So we talked about frogbit, a little 2-second pop quiz. Which one of these species do you think is frogbit? And so 4 is referring to this one. So in your mind, do you have a number? 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, the answer is 3. So if you got 3, give yourselves a round of applause. The second species that we are working on and again, I want to thank Bill and Tom from Eagle, is parrot feather. So parrot feather is also another species that prefers, freshwater, slow-moving habitats. It has feathery, really gorgeous, bright green leaves, and it can grow 1 foot above the water and again forms a dense mat. So this is a picture at the bottom. This is from Eagle, and you can kind of see it's just like a dense, really crazy patch, and restricts water flow. Like submerged leaves may be reddish, and US plants are all female here. And there's a couple of reasons why you might see it. It was legal at one point here, so people, had it in their backyard ponds. People used to dump out their aquariums, or maybe they thought it was pretty, so they bought it at a trade show. And in this map, you can kind of see how it's spreading over time. So these little red dots are like, reports of parrot feather in 1890. And you can kind of see it's gradually getting bigger, but like by 2018, you see it. We've thankfully only had a couple of spots in our region. And, one of them was in a landscaped pond. And, you might see it pop up time to time, but I do have to give credit to our state agency colleagues. They're on it, and they've treated it. And I don't think we've seen a lot of spread from those original locations. So this is a picture at a former nursery site. So this was bought from a nursery, and I think the owners converted it to another industry. And you can kind of see all this parrot feather on the side, and it was treated. And this is after at least one round of treatment. We still saw some. And this is all parrot feather here, but it's still reddish. And so it is a little bit tricky to ID it if it's all underwater. So you will have to look a little bit carefully for that one. This is a picture we have in a backyard pond. And so if you look at the backyard property, the house is located here, and they have a really nice little pond. And after treatment, we went back and we only saw one plant, which we grabbed, and we haven't seen it since. So this is a species where even a small fragment can result into a new plant. So just grabbing it quickly is not exactly the best way to go about it, because the fragments will break, and you really have to gently kind of make sure you're working that root or that stem loose, and then collecting it. And if you have a lot of it, herbicide is definitely the way to go for this. But we are seeing success in this, and so we are happy to report that. And then we did see some in a neighborhood pond. So this site was not necessarily in the JLW CISMA, but it was close by. And this is one of those, housing complex, cookie cutter houses. And there's a common pond. People will, probably come here and go fishing. And so we saw a few plants there. And so this is a really cool picture of parrot feather. And, look how voluminous it is underneath water, and it's kind of red. So it doesn't have that characteristic, green feathery plant at the for most of it. So imagine if you didn't see this part here, you might confuse it with milfoil, if you're not familiar with aquatic invasive species, or the coon tail plant that we have. And so unless you see that green telltale, it is hard to kind of see. So like I said, we've had some success, a couple of years of no reoccurrences at some of the sites that we've been monitoring, but we still need to monitor those. And the state used Procellacor to manage that one. The next one I'll talk about is Japanese stiltgrass. And I would like to acknowledge some help. We got a lot of help with our partner, the Washtenaw County Parks and Rec Commission, and Allison was our point person on that one. So stiltgrass is one of those species, in that it's like kind of, if you look at the map, it's really kind of moving in from the southeast US, not in Florida, but like outside of Florida, but southeast, and it's kind of moving its way through. And it is a grass species. It was found about 1910, and originally stiltgrass was used as packing material. So people used to ship porcelain and, pack probably like the dried leaves in there. And, you can imagine someone probably grabbing all that stuff and throwing it in their compost or throwing it in the backyard. And then, eventually we became to have a stiltgrass problem. And this this grass can reach about 2 to 4 feet in height. The flowers appear in late summer. So in our region, we started seeing some flowering in October. So it could vary depending on the amount of sun, what the canopy looks like. It's shade tolerant and full sun tolerant. So it's one of those species that will probably be successful in a variety of conditions. And when I say, I show people a picture of this grass, they're like, oh, I think we have it. I think we have it. Because, it looked like a grass, but a couple telltale features to kind of focus on is the lance-shaped leaf that you can see here. And it has a white line down the middle of that leaf. And that white line, it's not a very necessarily a painted white line, a very strong white line, but rather it looks like a reflective, white hair that kind of produces that line effect. So sometimes you'll actually take the leaf and it's just, you'll see that indentation, but you won't see that bright white white line. So just to kind of be on the lookout for that one. But it does have like that white reflective line down the middle. And right next to it, I do have a native grass, it's just very long, it's tapered. So it does look a little bit different. It does have a shallow root, so it's very easy for you to be able to pick it up. And here's a picture of it with, some of the seeds emerging. Each plant could have 100 to 1,000 seeds. So, very easy to see how it could quickly become a problem in the area. And these seeds could remain viable for about 5 years in the soil. So it's definitely one of those things where you want to, keep going back to a site and treating it and monitoring it for that new regrowth, and definitely trying to treat it before the seeds come out. And, one of these areas, the bare, sparse patch, it will take over. So we've been finding it in a variety of locations. We found in Watkins Lake State Park in a wooded area that used to be privately owned, but then it was taken over by Washtenaw County. And we actually did a very big education outreach campaign. I know we had stiltgrass in the area before, and so our county and a local group also did a lot of hard work. They did a lot of education outreach, and we were contacted. Sorry, the county folks were contacted by someone who was just walking, and I don't know if they're looking for mushrooms or something, or they're looking foraging for food and morels, but they identified it in the middle of a forest. And we found a lot of it to be on a 2-track trail. So people used to put their ATVs on that part of the property. And so potentially it could have gone in from there. It could have come in from like deer or hunting. We've also seen the species on private residences, so people's backyards. It could be from shared landscapers or, like seeds from nearby areas that are spreading. Also in like local county parks and so on. This has, we've been treating it for a couple of years and we have seen some improvement, but again, it takes time. And we've been using 0.5% glyphosate, and we seem to see some good results out of that. And one of the things that's really interesting about this species is that we have had some major storms that took out a lot of trees. And so one of the concerns that we have is that with that opening of the canopy, it might provide, a better environment and allow for some of the stiltgrass to expand. So there are a couple of spots where we're going to be monitoring very carefully because of the changing environment. And we've also had some hand pulling experience on a local property. And I also would like to thank some volunteers from the local conservation districts. And we're trying to see, is hand pulling effective? And we've had some success with it. We've been hand pulling some of the stiltgrass, and you can kind of see on this property, once it starts approaching like the established brush of other species, we're not seeing stiltgrass take over this area, but we will see it take over, all areas approaching that established brush. And same thing over here. We've been pulling and pulling, and we've not seen it make its way over. One of the problems that we do have is that one part of the property had some damage. This is a different part of the region, but we experienced a lot of storms and wind in that summer, and it knocked down a bunch of trees. And unfortunately, they weren't able to mow and get access. And so one problem we're having is a lot of regrowth because we aren't able to actually access that. So we're going to have to talk to the landowners and kind of figure out a way to kind of resume our activities there. So those are some of the species that we have in our region directly. And here's some that is right on the border. And so mile a minute weed, or as my colleague tells me, 1.6 kilometers a minute weed. It's an annual vine. It has triangular leaves, which you can kind of see over here. It has recurved barbs, and I'll show a better picture of that in the next slide, with some white flowers and blue fruits. And actually those fruits are edible. I did try it. Nothing spectacular, but you can eat it. And each vine can have up to, 3,500 seeds. And from a habitat perspective, it prefers open, disturbed areas, wetlands, streams, right-of-ways, roads. We've seen it in some farming areas. And again, it prevents photosynthesis. It will blanket an area, and which will reduce biodiversity. In the bottom here, you can kind of see those recurved barbs I was talking about, which is kind of nice because, it goes the other way. So as it grows, it can kind of propel itself forward a little bit. So, a cool evolutionary advantage it has to growing. So here's a better picture in context with the leaf. And it's very effective at grabbing carbon from the air and, nitrogen from the soil efficiently. And look at this. This is like a really thick blanket of mile a minute weed. So anything underneath there, it's not getting enough sunlight. The weight of this, as it grows on top of trees, it can damage the branches, etc. And this is an old picture. So this is a cool picture here. If you look at this light brown tinsel-like material, this is a mile a minute weed after the plants have died. The seeds are still here. And look how it's blanketing these other trees. So it just basically climbs up it and it'll sit on top. And so it can over time, weaken those trees. We have a picture here of some mile a minute weed approaching a cornfield. And so that could have impacts there. Or, if you have machinery and you're clearing away a lot of, dead corn or weeds, you might actually get this stuck in the wheels and transport it to another area. And then, like I said in one of the earlier slides, we are a very big Christmas tree production state. And a specific call out was made to Christmas trees farms and restoration groups, because having this plant or this vine in the area could really throw back all your conservation efforts and really, stifle an entire year's worth of tree growth if you're not careful. So definitely keep an eye out for this. Spotted lanternfly is receiving a lot of attention in the media, and I know that you had a really nice presentation, I think a couple weeks ago, about spotted lanternfly. So I won't go into too much detail about this, but we recently found spotted lanternfly in Oakland County, which is really close by one of our areas. And this species is about 1 inch long, 1/2 inch wide. You can kind of see its gray forewing, a lot of black spots, really bright red hind wings, which also has black spots, and you can kind of see some yellow on the abdomen. It has a variety of life stages. I apologize, this is not the greatest picture, but you can kind of see my finger next to one. So you can kind of get a context of how big these insects can get. Their preferred species of choice is tree of heaven. That's a host species for spotted lanternfly, which we have a lot of in Michigan and in Lenawee County specifically. So here's a couple of pictures of it. If you look at the female tree of heaven species, you'll notice that the seeds, we call them samaras, they look like the helicopter maple ones, but the seeds are actually in the middle, whereas in the maple, they're on the edge. And tree of heaven, it really takes over in areas. This is a really cool picture. And, you know, this didn't used to be here a few years ago, and now it's taken over. So definitely is bad news. So not only is the insect an invasive species, but this particular tree of heaven is also an invasive species within itself. And it used to be a landscapers or, you know, local governments used to plant this, the dream species, because it grew quickly, it provided privacy, and people just really liked having this exotic tree species around. Couple of telltale signs. If you break a stem, you can kind of see the little heart-shaped notch. If you look at the base of the leaves, because it does look similar to a few other species, but tree of heaven will have these tooths at the base. And if you flip it over, there's like almost these gland-like spots at the base. If you crack the branch open, you'll see like a pith, like a little honeycomb soft pith. So here's a better picture. So this is from Penn State. And so you can kind of see the different, you know, life cycles from black and white, and then it kind of looks like a deranged ladybug to when it gets to its adult stage. And so we are in the winter stage. So you might see some egg sacs. Look for those egg sacs. You might see some adults around. We've had, you know, some cold weather, but hasn't been extended, at least in our region. So keep an eye out for these. One of the key places I would suggest people to kind of keep an eye out for is at some of these nursery packaging facilities. That's where we found it in Michigan. And I know that previous to the Oakland County infestation, we had found some dead specimens in Michigan and in Oregon in those nursery packages. There was also some spotted lanternfly in Ohio, found near railroads. There's a lot of tree of heavens. And based on some of the talks I've attended, they seem to like that rusty patch on metal. And I'll hand out there. They are a sap sucker. So the problem with spotted lanternfly is that they will damage the fruit, but then they will secrete something called honeydew, which is, you know, like a really sugary, sweet urine type of material, and that attracts, you know, mold. And it has the potential to impact things like almonds, apples, grapes, maple, and hops. And so you can kind of see from our earlier slide, hops and maple, grapes and apples, like these were pretty important to Michigan agriculture. The next species is a very tasty species, the red swamp crayfish. This crayfish has a dark reddish body, and you can't really go by body color to identify, because it ranges. It could be like an olive, light olive, brown, tan color, all the way to a really, really dark, almost bluish black color. So you want to look for those red bumps on its body, the elongated head with the triangular rostrum. It likes permanent freshwater habitats. And this is actually the species that you'll often find at the buffet, or you'll find in the frozen food section. So this is the one that we typically eat and is often used in those crayfish boils in the South. So you've heard of those really famous Louisiana crayfish boils. This is that species. Couple of different pictures here. This is a female with some eggs. Here's one of the darker colors I was talking about. This is one that was just freshly molting. a little baby. And this is a unique, so this is like a really, really small baby, but another feature that we see on the red swamp crayfish is that if you actually flip the crayfish over and you look on the back of their tail, you'll see a really dark black line that goes up and down it in the middle. You can kind of see it here, little line, it kind of extends all the way down. So also flip it over and look for that black line for red swamp crayfish. It's been found in, small pockets like ponds, Gulf Club ponds. So be, really vigilant. They are mobile. They can travel, through drainage ditches. They can travel on land. They, are almost described as a land lobster. They can be like, up to 5 inches long. I actually was grocery shopping. I was minding my business, going for a nice little grocery shop adventure. And I went to a store and I was really excited because I saw that they had opened up a new tank, and that tank had always been empty, but today it was filled, and it was something cool, and I was going to buy it and I was going to eat it. So when I walked over, I noticed it was crayfish, and I was excited, but then I looked carefully and I was like, oh no, this is red swamp crayfish. And I tried to covertly, I took my cell phone out and I tried to pretend I was in some detective show, and I was taking some side pictures, and I was able to report it, and it was red swamp crayfish, and the store owners they didn't know, and it wasn't their fault. They got it from a distributor, and so when you're ordering food online, or if you're a store owner and you're trying to get food or seafood from a distributor, you really have to make sure that the species that you're bringing in or you're ordering alive, check to make sure that it's allowed to be shipped into the province or the state that you reside in. And so you may have a distributor where it's legal to sell there, but they may not remember, or they may disregard some of the laws and just send that species out. And so if you are in pet stores, I definitely want you to kind of keep an eye out for this there as well. Sometimes people will mislabel deliberately or accidentally the species. So look for the Procambius, like the name of the actual species, the scientific name. And it was spread because we used to be allowed to purchase this species legally alive. And so people used to buy it as bait, for when they were finished cooking with it, they had a couple extra, so they're using it for bait. Like I said, they are mobile. Teachers used to be able to get these crayfish for their classrooms, used to order them and, do like the scientific life cycle observations. And of course, at the end of the year, nobody wanted to kill the classroom pet. And so quite often you would see, a teacher and a row of students walking with such pomp and circumstance to the nearby river or a pond, and then just releasing their class pet to freedom. And so unfortunately, sometimes innocent reason is why we have these invasive species. And once they get here, they could potentially introduce disease to the local population. They are competitive. They are more aggressive than some of the local crayfish. And so they could outcompete some of those guys, even outcompete some of the juvenile fish. They can injure fish, and they can also cause erosion for the shoreline. So in this picture here, you can see a lot of burrows, and they will burrow. You'll see chimneys on the top. And when I was walking at a site, I took a step, in one direction, and a couple feet later, I saw water, shoot up from another hole. And so it really creates, they really create Swiss cheese out of the local shoreline. And that would not be good if you had a building nearby or a parking structure nearby. So erosion is definitely a concern there as well. And I don't know too much about marble crayfish, but I wanted to put it in there because it was recently put in on our watch list species. Marble crayfish, I believe this species was kind of, an accident or a series of unfortunate occurrences. But, you had a couple of crayfish in a tank, and, they were able to self-clone We have not found it in the wild so far, but it has been found in stores, and it reproduces through parthenogenesis. Some of them can be quite blue looking, but some of them could be, you know, a different color. So keep an eye out for this. This is something that people will have in the aquarium trade. And then water lettuce is another aquatic species. And this one is actually allowable for sale and position in Michigan. It's a free floating perennial, basically like an open head of lettuce that's just, you know, bobbing around there. It has really thick leaves with short white hairs. Similar impacts to other aquatic invasive species, you know, mats, block sunlight, you know, prevents recreation. And it can also have extended, survives extended periods on moist substrate, you know, with some of its roots. And it is found, so this is like a map from Misson, a plug for this website. You could see, you know, some occurrences of water lettuce here. So not quite in our area, but you can definitely see it in the east to southeast part. And so you've seen, you know, a bunch of Star Trek, you know, references in this talk, and why? Well, you know, we're not traveling to other solar systems or planets or other places yet. I mean, maybe if you're a billionaire, you will be sooner, but we're not going to other planets yet, but we are traveling to other places. And so our problems are soon going to be your problems. Hopefully not, but you know, if some of these trends persist, you know, the movement of stiltgrass, there's a very good chance that you'll be seeing things like frogbit, stiltgrass, mile-a-minute weed, spotted lanternfly, you know, come through your area. And so, you know, we live in a very global society. We have a lot of shipping and trade back and forth between Mexico, Canada, and United States. And so there's always a risk for some of these species to move around via planes, trains, or automobiles. So some of the geographic vectors I want to point out. So in this map, this shows all the public boat launches in Michigan, or at least the bottom part of Michigan. So this green star right over here, that's kind of like where the start of the Grand River. So the Grand River is a very large river in Michigan. It's not the Grand River that some of you in Ontario may be familiar with. This is obviously a different one, but it is quite long, a lot of recreation. And look at all these public boat launches. And, you know, a very popular beach area, Grand Haven, is where the river ends. So there's a lot of avenues and places for people to recreate. And if people are not cleaning off their boats, you know, checking for invasive species, there's a lot of places where these invasive species could drop off. And so our region is interesting because we have two major highways. We have Interstate 94 and we have US 127. And so one goes north, south, and the other one goes east, west. And so we are a central hub between Lake Erie and Lake Michigan. A decent amount of people will cross right through us. And I showed you a lot of public boat launches, and Lake Erie and the Saginaw region have a lot of frogbit in that area. So if you have a boat in there and you're moving it, there could be a chance that you're bringing it to inland ponds or other areas. We do have a law in here that you have to clean off and pick off all the materials hanging off your trailers and your boats and your kayaks. And so definitely you're going to have to make sure that you're not bringing turions over. And if you look at this map, just to kind of show how easy it is to travel and how quick, it's only about 2 hours and 50 minutes to go from Grand Haven to the other end of Lake Erie. So yeah, it's pretty quick, and people can go one weekend in one spot and then maybe a couple of days later go to another spot, especially during the summer. And a lot of these aquatic invasive species, they can survive out of water for a few days, especially if it's in a dark, damp environment. It could, live on your waders. So there's definitely a lot of risk for this. In agriculture, another thing to consider is, some farmers may share equipment, or they may have different farms in different areas. And so quite often they're sharing equipment, or they're moving equipment between farms in other counties and other states. Potentially they're transporting raw or processed crops that could have some contamination in it, bringing in mulch. So I know people love free things. I love free things, and as an adult, you get excited about gardening and mulch. So sometimes you might see a pile of free mulch or free firewood. Really resist the urge to bring that home, because you never know what's in it, in the hay or the seeds. Even shared workforce. So sometimes you'll have people working in a few different places. And so the back and forth, if you're not decontaminating your shoes or your equipment, there could be some spread that way. So here's the really popular invasive species curve that pretty much every invasive species talk shows. And the main point of this, obviously, is that if you have a small infestation, like one plant or one small area, and you treat it quickly, the eradication goal could be more readily achieved. And so the y-axis is area infested, the x-axis is time, the second axis is control costs, second y-axis. And so in the beginning, it's cheaper and it's easier to kind of contain the infestation. But as you get to the end, you're really just trying to manage and protect key features of a landscape. It's just too expensive and too big to kind of get rid of. And unfortunately, public awareness typically begins in this area, just as it's taking off and becoming a problem. And so the reason for this talk is hopefully we'll get people looking for some of these species at this part of the time scale. When you're out there kayaking, look for these, frog bit or parrot feather along the edges, and trying to manage it before it becomes an issue. And so this is really important, because education and outreach is effective. It helps. And as I'd mentioned in the stiltgrass example, we had someone who had read some of the material that had been out there on stiltgrass, and they approached, my partners and said, hey, we think this is stiltgrass. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult for, the land managers to find, a small patch of stiltgrass in that entire wooded forest. And when you do education and outreach, I think it's important to incorporate diversity and different age groups. A couple of things, we think youth is important, right? That's a future generation of stewards. But I think it's also important to get at people who are like young professionals. They often volunteer at our events. And a lot of our dedicated support and volunteers are those who are retired. They are very interested in a lot of these programs, and they help us. And so when you're doing an education outreach component, include all sorts of age groups and demographics, especially with diversity. We really want to make sure that we're reaching different groups. And one of the things that's kind of cool is I come from an international background. I have a lot of international friends. And so I was able to create some holiday brochures in different languages. So we did, I got some stuff in Arabic, Spanish, Hindi. So that was a cool opportunity to work with my dad. Traditional Chinese and English. So we had 5 different campaigns that we were able to kind of reach out to. And we have a very diverse community in Michigan, and we really want to make sure that those groups are getting the same amount of information, that they know that we exist. And a lot of immigrant families are I'm hoping to kind of promote their inclusion in natural resources, get them involved in these kind of careers. So definitely incorporate a wide variety of people. Accessibility is also important. You know, I'm doing this talk in Zoom, I'm sitting in my house, and, you know, people keep saying that, oh, well, Zoom, it's not the same as in person, which I agree. In person allows that back and forth, that in-person vibe, but Zoom also allows, you know, maybe people with disabilities to kind of not have to deal with how to transport themselves to a a meeting. Or maybe if you're older and you don't really feel comfortable driving at night, especially in winter, you know, you're able to log in and watch a presentation on your computer. Or if you're, you know, a parent and you have a bunch of kids, you don't have to worry about babysitting. You can just attend some of these informational meetings online. So I've really embraced the Zoom or, you know, Google Meets or Teams. And I think that making sure that we hit the right balance of in-person stuff and virtual is important. And also like choosing places that are accessible to people. We really try to make sure that there's an option, you know, like places where people can attend that may have, you know, wheelchair barriers. So try to like pick places that might allow for more people to attend, and, you know, work with local organizations. We had a really cool program with Save Our Youth, and Save Our Youth worked with underserved youth and trying to get them involved in a variety of projects. And so I said, hey, you know, we're neighbors in the building. How would you like to partner with us on kind of promoting invasive species education and environmental education in general? And so we also had another partner of ours, NRCS, also agree to help us. And so we had a really nice program for youth and trying to getting them excited about invasive species and environmental issues. And social media is definitely a big thing for us. We love social media. We love memes. It's a fun way to kind of get the information out there. And attending and doing, you know, tables at boat launches. We've also partnered with mobile boat washing organizations. I think MSU Extension is a really cool program. So if you're in Michigan, look them up. And really, you know, you don't have to recreate the wheel. There are a bunch of really valuable resources out there. Go to like missin.msu.edu. You can report and get some good ID information there. A lot of your state, federal, and provincial government sites have really good information. I know Michigan.gov has an invasive species educational website. You can get a bunch of stuff for kids. YouTube, social media, you know, even CISMA websites have a lot of information. This is not my site, but I got really excited when Wisconsin released their invasive species calendar. So if you go to the extension, this is a really, really cool site. And if you kind of look at some of the species, it tells you, you know, if you can expect to see that plant or what part of the plant you might be seeing. You know, is it you know, leaves changing color? You can sort through, you know, to pick a, you know, aquatic species, you know, forested ones or roadside. And so this is really helpful for those if you're trying to see, you know, is this plant, you know, blooming? So when is the right time for me to start looking for this? Because you don't want to necessarily look for stiltgrass in April because the chances are it's probably not sprouted yet. We tend to wait until June. So this kind of information will help you prioritize, you know, what species to look for at what time to maximize your time and your efforts. So love this tool. Yeah, so that's pretty much about that one. And so we do have a lot of beautiful landscapes in Michigan and in North America. You know, a lot of them are relatively pristine, but you know, we have some places that have a couple invasive species, but with due diligence and identification and working together as a team, we can kind of prevent it from becoming unmanageable. So with that, that's pretty much all I have. So we'll open it to questions and I'll do the best I can to answer them.
Thank you so much, Shikha. That was great. I'll read some of the questions that have came through. So Leslie in the chat asked, what kind of butterfly is in the photo collection that includes the Blandings turtle?
Oh, that's the Mitchell satyr. The Mitchell satyr's butterfly.
Great. Okay, and Heather asks, are there multilingual resources available online? We have a high cottager population that comes here from all over the GTA and beyond, lots of invasives now.
Yeah, so I know that the National Park Service in USA has a variety of brochures and things of that nature. So it really depends, you know, it's a tough question to answer because I didn't see enough, you know, in my search for this stuff. I mean, there's a decent amount of Spanish material out there, and obviously the national park has a couple different ones, but I just don't see a lot of local resources, customizable resources. So I would look to some of the federal agencies for that, specifically the NPS. And this might be an opportunity though for some of the partnerships with, you know, educational institutions that have you know, native speakers from a variety of worlds. And so one of the things that I was really sure when I was creating the documents for us is, one, I wanted to make sure that it was correct. You know, we can't just put stuff in Google Translate. You know, everybody has had those experiences where they put something in and Google translated something else, right? And so I really made sure that I approached people that had, you know, a scientific background, or at least background with familiarity with some of these technical terms. And then I also had to make sure that they were native speakers in that language. And so I was able to, you know, provide them with the English, and then they were able to work with me and get that translated. So it does take a little bit of effort. And, you know, maybe that could be something that people can work on to expand in their own region.
Awesome, thanks. I'm going to read one more. Will says, we have used black landscape shade mats on one of our local slow moving rivers here in Ontario to help manage populations of newly spreading frog bit. Have you tried or considered these in Michigan?
I have not tried that, or I don't think I even know much about it. So that would be something cool to kind of think about. Could you read out what it was called again? Like shaded?
Um, Black landscape shade mats.
Okay, shade maps. Yeah, we have not used that one. I know something similar. I think if it's just putting, you know, like shade, you know, like a black, is it just putting like black tarp on something? We've done that for terrestrial stuff, but not for aquatics. So yeah, that's a new one for me. So thanks for bringing it up, and I'll definitely look into it.
Great. I had one more come through. I'll read it off quickly. Wilma asks, Lake Erie area in Ontario sightings / reporting of any of these species?
Lake Erie definitely has frog bit, and I'm not quite sure about, let me see. I don't know if I've seen like stiltgrass in the Lake Erie area, but water lettuce is definitely, if you look at that map, that was definitely in that area as well, like near the southeast portion. I don't know if I've seen things like mile a minute weed there. Definitely keep an eye out for spotted lanternfly though. I definitely feel like that would be a hot spot, just because Lake Erie tends to have a lot of traffic and movement, you know.
Great. So thank you again to Shikha for presenting today, and thank you all for tuning in. This webinar has been recorded and will be posted on our website. That's www.invasivespeciescenter.ca. Just a reminder to take a couple minutes to fill out our survey, and we would really appreciate that. Our next webinar will be Wednesday, January 18th at 11 a.m., titled Little Program, Big Responsibility, a behind-the-scenes look at how Saskatchewan manages a provincial watercraft inspection program to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species. And thank you all for joining.
Thank you.